All right, guys, so here we go. We're going to go ahead and go through these factor questions. So remember on these, it is always handy to have your factoring map out. And so while we're talking, I'm going to get mine out because I didn't already have it out for today. But on these, remember we have the funnel, so our original starting point is always going to be to simplify, rearrange, and remove the greatest common factor. So on these, check for it. Simplify. Simplify, again, means that we have something to combine, some like terms that need to be combined, and here we don't have that. Rearrange means it's not in standard form, and it is currently in standard form, so we can go ahead and leave it. And then remove a greatest common factor means that we check to make sure that we don't have any greatest common factors that need to be pulled out. In this case, 9 is 1, 3, and 9, and 4 is 1, 2, and 4. And none of those are common other than 1. So we're good on that. All right, so once we've checked those three things, all right, we notice that we have a binomial. Binomial means we have two terms here. So we come down to binomial, and we are checking to see if we have a difference of squares, a difference of cubes, or a sum of cubes, okay? So we're going to look at this. Remember, we'll start with difference of squares. So difference of squares means that we had to have difference, which is subtraction. It means that we had exponents that are divisible by 2. Well, 2 is divisible by 2, so that's true. And then the other numbers are perfect squares. So if you notice, 9 is a perfect square, 3 times 3 is 9, and 4 is a perfect square because 2 times 2 is 4. So what we do have here is a difference of squares. So since we have a difference of squares, we're going to go ahead and solve it using our method, okay? So remember that we are going to factor it into two binomials. The first term, you're just going to take the square root of this. So the square root of 3x squared is 3x. We use the same sign, and then we take the square root of 4, which is 2. And then over here, we take the square root of 9x squared, and we get 3x. We use the opposite sign, and we take the square root of 4, and we get 2. So what we end up with is 3x minus 2 and 3x plus 2. Okay, the powers are 1, so we're probably done, but we do need to check our answer to make sure that we got it correct. So if I multiply these two things together, I should end up with what I started with. So if I take 3x and multiply it by 3x, I get 9x squared. If I multiply 3x times 2, I get 6x. If I multiply negative 2 times 3x, I get negative 6x. And if I multiply negative 2 times 2, I get negative 4. When I combine my like terms, positive 6 and negative 6 add together to get 0. So I'm left with 9x squared minus 4, which is what I started with. So yes, these are the correct factors for this binomial, okay? So remember, your notes are all attached at the bottom of your classwork page on Google Classroom. I will also include them in this presentation so that you have everything that you need, okay? They will be available to you in case you don't have them for whatever reason. So you do, they should be in your notes still from where we did this a few weeks ago, but if you don't have them, I'm attaching my notes so that you'll have a copy, okay? All right, so down to the next problem. So again, we start with simplify, rearrange, and remove a greatest common factor. So let's do that. Here we have 4x cubed minus 12x squared plus 8x. All right, with this, we do have, doesn't need to be simplified, doesn't need to be rearranged, but there is a greatest common factor. So if we look here, 4 is a greatest common factor between 4 and 12 and 8. And there is a variable present in all of these terms, and it's x. So we're going to take x, and the smallest exponent is 3, 2, 1. So 4x is what we are going to use as our greatest common factor. Now, to find what's left, we take each of these terms and divide them by 4x. So 4x cubed divided by 4x is going to leave us with x squared. Negative 12x squared divided by 4x is going to leave us with negative 3x. And 8x divided by 4x leaves us with 2. Okay? So now we have 4x multiplied by x squared minus 3x plus 2. Our powers are not 1. Okay? What we're left with is a monomial, which is, it's fine. We just leave it. We can't factor that any further. But we do have a trinomial. So if we come down to trinomial, we know that we need to try the factor test to see if it can be factored any further. So let's test it out. Okay, so factor test is b squared minus 4ac. So our b value here is negative 3, so we're going to do negative 3 squared. All right, minus 4 multiplied by a, which is 1, and multiplied by c, which is 2. So if we plug that into the calculator, negative 3 squared is 9, and 4 times 2 is 8. So we end up with 9 minus 8, which is 1. And 1 is a perfect square. And since it's a perfect square, we can go ahead and factor this even further. So that's what we need to do in this case. We need to factor this. So that's where we go into our backwards FOIL. So with backwards FOIL, remember, we are going to start by looking for two numbers that multiply to equal a times c, so 1 times 2, which is 2, and add to equal b, which is negative 3. So two numbers that multiply to equal 2 and add to equal negative 3. Okay, so factors of 2, we have 1 times 2 and 2 times 1. But we also could do negative 1 times negative 2 would still give us a positive 2. So if I multiply both of those, I get a positive 2, which is what I want. But if I add them, 1 plus 2 equals 3, negative 1 plus negative 2 equals negative 3. So these are the two numbers that I want to use. If I multiply negative 1 and negative 2, I get positive 2. If I add negative 1 and negative 2, I get negative 3. Okay, so those are the two numbers I want to use. So the next step is to take this trinomial again. Remember, this is the one we're working with. We're going to take x squared minus 3x plus 2, and we are going to split this middle term into these two numbers. So we have x squared, we have negative x, and we have negative 2x. All right, and then plus that 2. So all I did was take that negative 3 and I split it into negative 1 and negative 2. Because if I add them together, I'm still going to get negative 3. So I haven't really changed anything. I've just kind of split it. Don't forget that I still have this 4x as a factor out here. Okay, it's just out there hanging out because we just need to keep him attached. All right. So from here, we need to group. So 4x is still out here. We hadn't forgot about him. We're going to group x squared minus x. And we're going to group negative 2x plus 2, okay? And then we are going to pull out a greatest common factor for each of those two. All right, so remember, this is step by step in your backwards FOIL notes in case you forgot from last week. So we have that 4x still out here. The greatest common factor here is x. So we have, if we take out the x, we're left with x minus 1. And then here, our greatest common factor is a negative 2. So if I take out a negative 2, I am left with x, and I am left with a negative 1. Okay? So now all I do is rewrite my two binomials that I've just found. So remember, 4x is still a factor. X minus 1 is my binomial that is common to both of these. So x minus 1. And then the leftovers are x and a negative 2. So x minus 2 becomes our leftovers. And so our final step on this is just to check our answer. So we need to multiply all of these back out. And remember, I can multiply the 4x times the x minus 1 and then multiply all of that by x minus 2, or I can do these two first and then multiply it. It doesn't really matter, okay? Whatever order I choose, I still will get the same answer. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply them left to right. So 4x times x is 4x squared. 4x times negative 1 is negative 4x. And then I'm going to take that and multiply it by this x minus 2. So 4x squared times x is 4x cubed. 4x squared times negative 2 is negative 8x squared. Negative 4x times x is negative 4x squared. And negative 4x times negative 2 is positive 8x. Then I combine my like terms. 4x cubed minus 12x squared plus 8x is exactly what I started with, okay? So these are my full and final factors of this trinomial, okay? it factors out to 4x, x minus 1, and x minus 2. All right, so that one was a big problem, but a really good example. So we're going to stop there, and then we will finish the last 3 examples in another video.